Hi everyone. You know, as an astrologer, I'm frequently in the situation of helping a person deal with something that seems utterly outside of their control. I mean, astrology really is all about understanding what aspect of your life is under your control and changeable, what aspect of your life needs a lot of hard work to get under your control, and which aspects of your life are not under your control. Whether you call that fate or karma or genetics or God, whatever the case may be, we have this spectrum of what is controllable, what is accessible and not. And one of the responsibilities of an astrologer is to help people understand what is within their realm and what is not. But in so doing, we often touch on some of the most core issues of what it means to be a human being, especially nowadays, of course, and also what it really means to be in control. It's fine to say in theory we can control certain things, we can make decisions about certain things and so on. But very often there are deeper things which trap us. And one of the most important of those is fear. Fear might be one of the most paralyzing emotions that human beings can experience, and doubtlessly one of the most destructive. You know, essentially, when we look at what great masters have always said about fear, it points out something we know for ourselves, and that is that fear is almost always about something that has not happened. It might happen. It might have happened in the past. It might even have happened to someone else. But fear is really all about the possibility, the anxiety about something which may yet happen. And fear causes us to isolate ourselves, to retreat from the world, to do all of those things which exacerbate the problems that fear creates. Even worse, fear often causes suffering. We feel pain and anxiety. We prevent ourselves from doing things or isolate ourselves inside our homes or keep ourselves away from certain people and situations. We increase our suffering, and we are suffering about something that has not yet happened and probably won't happen. So let's say we're suffering about something that doesn't exist. Such is the power of fear. The Buddhist teacher Judith Leaf says that the essential cause of suffering and anxiety is essentially ignorance of the nature of reality. We discussed that when I spoke about suffering some episodes back, and we realized that part of the teaching of suffering is because we attach ourselves to the illusion of what's important in this world, material things, the senses, the outcomes of stuff. So very often it is because we don't really understand the nature of this reality that these various problems arise. Because of course, if we don't understand the nature of the reality, we're not truly understanding ourselves or our own part in that reality. So essentially, as Leaf says, we end up craving for and clinging to illusionary things. That, she says, is referred to as ego. And the gasoline in the vehicle of ego is fear. Ego thrives on fear, says Judith Leaf. And unless we figure out the problems of fear, we will never understand or embody any sense of egolessness or selflessness. That is a powerful thought. Unless we really understand the problem of fear, we are incapable of many of the important spiritual tasks, both for our world, selflessness, and for our own growth, egolessness. Such is the power of fear, but such indicates the importance of overcoming it. One of the great Buddhist teachers in the West, Traleg Kyabgon Rinpoche, says that we try mollify our fears by accommodating wealth, success, and fame. as he says, we surround ourselves with things and we try and achieve external things like wealth or success in order to protect ourselves from our fears, to not notice our fears by quietening them down. As he says, you might even get a new nose to protect yourself from your fears, because maybe if I get a new nose, they'll like me better or they'll think I'm more attractive. The fear itself has not been dealt with, but we modify it by changing external circumstances, by achieving external things that supposedly would help us with our fear, that after all stems from the deepest, darkest places inside ourselves. External things are not going to cut it when it comes to modifying those fears. When we do things to try and make ourselves secure by doing that, to try and establish our own sense of identity, we basically are barking up the wrong tree, says Charlie Rinpoche. We need to concentrate on that source by chasing outward things, by getting the nose job out of fear that people don't like us, or accumulating wealth out of fear of what the world is going to do to us. We actually inflame the emotion of fear. We make ourselves even more vulnerable in that inflaming of that fear. Another very important point, and one that deserves a lot of consideration nowadays, is another point raised by Judith Leaf, and that is that fear can actually be used as a tool of oppression. We deliberately oppress each other through fear. We create fears in each other. Politicians are masters of creating fear. And literally, we can be made to do things out of fear. The most obvious and simple example of that is a threat. When we are threatened about the outcome of something, then the threatener is playing on our fears. You can use any election to do that, be it a general election, be it something like the referendum referred to as the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom last week, where both sides in any of those kind of situations will use fears about what happens if you vote this and what happens if you vote that, and creating fear. Look at the American election campaign, look at the election campaign in your own country, and you'll discover that we can be made to do things out of fear because people in power will exploit it. In fact, people are so hungry for power that they deliberately exploit fear in order to achieve that power. And again, since, as ever, fear is almost always based on the past, which refers to things that happened before, usually to others, and an unknown future. And so the exceptional evil of those politicians that do that is that they create fears that almost certainly won't be fulfilled, because that is the nature of fear. Those fears were never based on real outcomes in the first place. They were based on a system of acquiring power over others by manipulating their insecurities, their past, their unknown future, causing fear in them and being made to do something. So to me, that's what seems exceptionally bad, is that the victims end up in a fearful state, still acquiring an unknown outcome. So the fears, again, are based on non-existent things, and things which are actually not related to the outcome of that election or that referendum or that political decision, which of course is going to have its own consequences that usually people didn't anticipate at all. No matter what people on either side of the debate might say about the results of Brexit or the results of the US election, the results of the South African election, no one actually knows. And the realistic likelihood is that the result is something else, because outside of us astrologers, human beings are not so fantastic at anticipating the future. When the emotion of fear becomes inflamed, it gets like a runaway train. It magnifies logarithmically. The more fear we have, the more fear we create, and basically it goes haywire, and we can literally become paralyzed It's the Buddha himself that says that we become bogged down by our fears of not getting what we want to have, and by being separated from what we already have, and by getting what we do not want. Not getting what we want, losing what we have, and getting what we don't want. If you think about fears, that you have had, think about those three things and acknowledge to yourself how many of your own fears are based around loss of something that you have or not getting something that you want. We literally become bogged down and increasingly anxious about that, and fear becomes this endless cycle of repetition. We do have tools in astrology that help us understand what it is that someone fears. When we look at those tools, we can also look at them to see what is it saying about fear itself. And when we look at how astrology identifies what people's fears are all about, we can see that astrology's basic idea is that fear is the fear of loss of control over our world, loss of control over our own lives, the fear that someone else or something else has control over our lives. Isn't it ironic that so much fear is actually caused by people who have control over our lives deliberately? Those aforementioned politicians, etc., who create fear in us with threats. And yet, fear itself is this often based on this anxiety that someone might have power over us. So there is this multiplying factor in fear. Yes, I do have power over you. Yes, this is the terrible thing that's going to happen to you. No wonder people feel so paralyzed when it comes to fear. Essentially, fear is always located outside of the present. It is usually related to the future. I might lose what I have. I might not get what I want. Those kind of things that I've already discussed. Not all fear is that. I mean, there is real fear as well, very often located in the present. So if you are being confronted by an angry wild animal, that is in the present, and it is a legitimate fear. Similarly, there are things in our present life that may very well cause fear, which helps us sometimes run away from them or face them. So in the present tense situation, we know the good old story of how fear can cause the fight or flight response, usually, and which is usually some kind of autonomic response. But let's not underestimate the fact that real fears do exist. So we can't dismiss all fear. We need to be able to tell the difference. And so our first understanding is that fear is related to the future. Usually. When it's related to the past, it's most often related to something that might happen again or that happened to someone else and might happen to you as well. Almost always involving the loss of something, be it something physical like your money or your security or something like that. The most common fear of the future is the fear of old age and the fear of dying. And like all kinds of fears, in many ways, the fear of death itself is related to ignorance. We don't know what death is, and so we fear it. So much fear is related to ignorance. The most obvious of those being xenophobia, fear of the other, fear of the stranger, fear of what is not like myself, or who is not like myself. And so xenophobia and often violence are based on fear of otherness. And again, that is really all about ignorance. Sometimes that ignorance stems from unexamined things within ourselves. Racism, homophobia, where we might have been the oppressor of others and we don't look at that. And so we project it out as fear, because sometimes we do those things unwittingly without realizing it, and unwillingly. And any look at ourselves would say, oh my gosh, maybe I'm a racist. Maybe that, if I look at that action, clearly I'm afraid of that person. So we build up an extra barrier, and once again, we've got that double loop where the fear creates fear creates fear. You know, there is no doubt that we try and protect ourselves from facing our fears. Because facing our fears is really about facing ourselves. Facing our fears, like I was just saying, might potentially lead to the conclusion that maybe I'm not such a great person after all. Maybe I'm not so fabulous. Maybe I'm not so advanced or evolved, as the case may be. I mean, sometimes there's such clear examples of how we do that, what's often referred to as cognitive dissonance. I see a lot of that cognitive dissonance as, fear of admitting certain things about yourself. I mean, we know that people can smoke cigarettes even though they know the damage that it does to their lungs. That's a fear of admitting, I am the one that is killing myself. Or people eat meat without thinking about what harm is done to animals, because if they did, they would have to say, I am responsible for the cruelty to animals. So we've got these protections that prevent us from examining ourselves, and they cause us to live in a little bubble of fear and reaction. I mean, take about what happens when you criticize a smoker, or when, even I'm speaking as a vegetarian myself, I'd have to even say, I know very well what happens when you criticize someone who's eating meat. There's a very strong defensive reaction. And the defensive reaction, while ostensibly based on I'm free to do exactly what I like, which is absolutely true, is also based on I refuse to look at what I'm really, really doing. So all those things that are harmful to self or harmful to others are things we don't want to acknowledge for ourselves. And then often we'll react with anger or violence or sarcasm or some form of aggression, revealing that there is a deeper fear. There is a fear that I'm a bad person, that I'm doing something wrong. So clearly, to overcome fear, we need insight. And as Rinpoche Traleg tells us, to Buddhism, insight involves profound reflection on our lives, looking deeply at our fear, looking deeply so that we see the nature of that fear. And from that, we can learn to work with it. Judith Life again says, and I quote from her, look straightforwardly at your own experience. Examine fear and dissect it into its components. Where does it arise? What is the sensation you feel when afraid? What kind of thoughts race through your mind when you are in a state of fear? What's your particular pattern? Do you panic? Do you freeze? Do you get really busy and try and fix everything? Do you get angry? At this stage in your lives, you need to try and understand that experience and break it down. So it's really all about self-reflection and self-examination. And in order to do that, we need some aspect of a spiritual focus in our lives. So I think what we need to do is sit down quietly and look hard at ourselves in the quiet, safe space of meditation and mindfulness, and ask yourself, where is the evidence that I have something to fear? Where is the evidence in the present about that thing? I can't fear it because something happened to so-and-so in the past about it, or I've had that, I fear that experience about the future. Ask yourself, is this the past? Is this the future, or is it the present? Is this happening to me? If it's the present, you may have found a legitimate fear. If you are sitting there being faced by a roaring lion, that's in the present. But if you're sitting there thinking a lion might come and attack me, that is a fear that's grounded in the future, that has actually no basis, and is a good example of how once we sort out our fears, so few of them actually live in the present. Then ask yourself, is my fear about people? And if that's the case, I dare you to ask yourself, am I being prejudiced? Do I fear something about this person or those people because they are different from me? Do I fear something about those people because I think they have some kind of control over me or control over my life? And finally, be honest with yourself. Look at your past. Is there a source of that fear? Did something once happen to you? Or did something once happen to someone else? Or was it your parents? Not from the Freudian sense of blame everything on your parents, but there's no doubt that if your parents were worried about money and worried about safety and worried about the house and so on, well, you probably will be too, and you've been taught to be fearful around those things. Realize that your fear is based in the past. See how literally it holds you back from experiencing new things. Spot the cattail. And from having a future. How can you have a future if you're trapped by the past? So realize the consequences of holding yourself in the past through fear. But sit quietly, looking at yourself, realizing that it's these inner demons that are connected into the past and the future that trap you there all the time. And if you release that fear, release the fear of others, acknowledging certain things to yourself. Maybe I have been harmful in that situation to others. The only way we can prevent that happening again, the only way that we can prevent the fear from being an authentic fear is by looking at it so that we become conscious, so that we change our behaviors, and so that we have nothing to base our fear about. Learn to catch your thoughts in mindfulness practices by being aware of what you do and what you say and what you think. And learn to catch your thoughts in meditation practices by sitting quietly and self-reflecting and considering these issues about the past and about the future. Ultimately, overcoming fear is about being honest with yourself. And as Rinpoche said, Rinpoche Troleg, the one I've been quoting from the whole time, he says, the very act of dealing with fear is the beginning of attaining fearlessness. The very act of self-reflection, of honesty with yourself, and of dealing with fear. That is the beginning of fearlessness. Time for your questions, and there is time for one question from Colin. Colin, thanks for your mail. Colin wrote to tell me about a particular health challenge that you're facing at the moment. There are a number of possible treatment options, and you want to know, firstly, do I need any kind of treatment? Is there a health concern to be worried about? And should I follow the treatment that's been recommended, or is there an alternative? Well, when looking at your chart, Colin, I do have to say that my major concern in your life is not really about your health. This particular health crisis is not the thing which gets you down. But it is important that your chart suggests that the reason for that is because of treatment, and it's because of very rapid treatment. Given the nature of what you've described to me as the problem and the types of treatments that are available, I'm not sure, because you didn't mention even if something like surgery were available for that. But the point that the chart makes is that you need a powerful, rapid treatment, something that intervenes quickly and that will be able to sort it out very quickly. Usually, those are the conventional treatments that we use in our Western medicine, not the alternative treatments. So there are good alternative treatments for things, and there are good Western treatments for things. And on the balance of things, as it stands with your chart at the moment, Colin, it does look like the more conventional treatment is a good option, especially if it's something rapid like surgery. As I say, I don't know the whole situation, but if that were an option, this probably would be a time for that. And then it's gone and behind you, and it looks like your chart doesn't have further concerns about that at all. So hopefully that is an option you can pursue. So remember, if you have a question about your life, about the outcome of something, about astrology, life, the universe, anything, give me a shout, and hopefully we'll be able to deal with it on the show. Get me at this email address, and of course, visit my website, and you'll be able to get hold of me there as well. Lee, can't answer a question like, when will be the best time for? That you'll have to get hold of me personally, and I can help you find the best date to actually start something. For our questions here on the show, we need to be contained around the immediate present, focused on something that is developing now or unfolding as we speak. If your question was, is this a good time for? Then I could answer your question. But when will be the best time for? who knows? I might have to sit and look through your chart for the next 3 years. So email me personally and I'll be able to help you with that. Meanwhile, we'll be back as ever, 12 o'clock at noon on Friday next week. See you then.